You are born before hospitals. No doctor, no crib, no baby monitor, no parenting book, no app tracking every feeding while everyone falls apart. There is just you, tiny, loud, furious, and barely assembled. You cannot walk, you cannot speak, you cannot hold up your own head. You cannot explain that you are hungry, cold, scared, or simply offended by being alive. And outside the circle of human bodies, the world is not gentle. Cold does not care. Infection does not care. Hunger does not care. A dirty wound, a fever, a bad season, one wrong plant, any of them can end a childhood before it becomes a life. So here's the mystery. How did a creature this helpless survive? Because if the answer had really been one mother and one father doing everything alone, the human species might have ended as a very short, very loud experiment. That is the first myth modern life teaches us, that a child belongs mostly to two parents sealed inside one home where those parents are expected to become the hospital, school, daycare, food supply, security team, and night shift all at once. That feels normal now. Historically, it is the weird part. For most of human history, children were not raised by a pair. They were raised by a crowd. Your mother held you, then your grandmother, then an aunt, then an older sibling, then a cousin, then another adult who was not technically close family, but if a baby was crying near them, they were now involved. You were passed from body to body like the most fragile object in the camp, except the object had lungs and no respect for anyone's sleep. And this was not chaos, it was the system. Anthropologists call it alloparenting, care from people other than the mother. The word sounds dry, but the reality was warm, physical, and constant. Among groups like the Hadza in Tanzania and the Aka in Central Africa, infants are held, watched, carried, soothed, and protected by many people. Mothers, fathers, grandmothers, aunts, older siblings, cousins, and trusted adults outside the immediate family. The baby is placed inside a human net. And that net mattered because human babies are absurd. A baby horse is born and starts walking almost immediately. A human baby spends months trying to operate its own neck. That is the price of huge brains, long childhoods, and babies born early enough for birth to remain possible. That created a brutal math problem. A mother had to recover from birth, feed herself, feed the baby, move with the group, gather food, avoid danger, and stay alive in a world with no antibiotics and no clean bottles. One person could not be the whole system, so the system became many. One of the clearest examples comes from the FA of the Ituri forest. Researchers Edward Tronick and Gilda Morelli found that by around 3 weeks old, an FA infant could already be handled by roughly 14 different caregivers and spend more than half of its time with someone who was not its mother. More than half. To modern ears, that sounds alarming, like the baby got passed around and nobody knows whose turn it is. But in that world, it was security. If the mother was tired, another body took over. If she needed to work, another pair of hands appeared. If the baby cried, help was already close enough to hear the first breath before the scream. The ancient solution was not, one parent becomes superhuman. It was, do not leave one parent alone. And this began with the most basic rule of ancient childcare. Keep the baby close. Before strollers, cribs, car seats, and expensive rocking devices that make your infant look like a burrito being gently processed by machinery, babies were carried on bodies, in slings, wraps, animal skins, woven fibers, whatever the environment could provide. A baby lived against warmth, heartbeat, breath, and movement. A carried baby leaves the adult's hands free, but this was more than transport. A newborn cannot regulate itself well. Its nervous system is still being assembled while already in use, which is bold. So the adult body becomes part of the baby's regulation system. The rhythm of walking calms it. The warmth stabilizes it. The heartbeat becomes a metronome for being alive. The baby is not just being carried. It is borrowing another person's body to finish becoming a person. And when night came, that closeness usually stayed. In many traditional societies, infants and small children slept near adults. A separate room for a newborn would not have looked like independence. It would have looked like madness. Because night was not cozy. Night was cold. Night was dark. Night was full of sounds that might be nothing or might be something with teeth making a plan. So children slept close, for warmth, nursing, protection, and because distance in the dark could become deadly. A helpless child's safest place was inside human contact. Which brings us to the crying. People imagine ancient parenting as harsh. Life was hard, so adults must have been hard. A baby cries and some prehistoric father says, "Good, the child is developing resilience," then goes back to sharpening a rock. But in many traditional societies, infant crying was answered quickly. Among the Kungsan of the Kalahari, researchers described caregivers responding to crying infants often within seconds. A baby cried, and someone came. Not always the mother, someone. That is the key. The crying did not fall onto one exhausted person every single time until that person's soul quietly left the body and watched from the corner. The group absorbed the scream before it broke one person. A grandmother could take the baby, an older sibling could distract them, another adult could carry, soothe, feed, or simply give the mother a few minutes to become human again. Ancient childcare was not perfect. It was distributed. It did not require one person to never break. It gave that person backup. That same logic continued through feeding. For much of human history, children breastfed for years, often 2 to 4, sometimes longer. To modern ears, that can sound extreme. But in a world without formula, refrigerators, sterilized bottles, fortified baby food, or pediatric clinics, long breastfeeding was survival infrastructure. Breast milk meant reliable food, immune protection, comfort, hydration, and calories through the most dangerous years. Frequent nursing could also suppress fertility, helping space births and improving the odds for the child already here. So long breastfeeding was not primitive, it was elegant. Weaning was usually gradual, with solid food entering slowly while nursing continued. But eventually, that warm, carried, nursed baby became something much more dangerous: a toddler. A toddler is what happens when an infant gains mobility before judgment. Suddenly, every object is a toy, a weapon, food, or a calling. So what did ancient people do when children started moving away from the body? They did not put them in school. They put them in life. There were no classrooms, worksheets, or curriculum calendars, and yet children had to learn an impossible amount: plants, tracking, water, tools, weather, danger, sharing, and how to live in a group where you cannot simply block someone and move to another city. The curriculum was enormous. The method was simple: be there. Children learned by watching, copying, trying, failing, and trying again. They were not removed from adult life and trained for it in a separate artificial world. They grew up inside the real one. They saw adults dig, gather, hunt, cook, repair, carry, negotiate, joke, mourn, and argue without destroying the group. Then they copied it. Badly at first. A child made a tiny tool, a crooked basket, a useless little bow, a dramatic imitation of adult work that probably looked ridiculous and was also the beginning of competence. Melvin Connor, who studied childhood among the Kungsan, documented how children learned with surprisingly little direct instruction. Adults were not constantly lecturing. Children watched, they imitated, they practiced through play. And that is the twist. Play was not the opposite of learning. Play was childhood's flight simulator for a world that did not offer refunds. Children played hunting, gathering, tool making, caring for babies, rituals, arguments, and adult roles. A toy bow was not just a toy. It was aim, timing, strength, and attention disguised as fun. Nobody needed a lesson plan. The environment wrote one. The children ran it. And they did not run it only with children their exact age. In many traditional societies, children moved in mixed age groups. Younger ones followed older ones. Older ones guided, teased, protected, and occasionally dragged them away from terrible ideas. A 5-year-old learned from an 8-year-old. An 8-year-old learned from a 12-year-old. A toddler hovered at the edge of the pack like an unpaid intern with dangerous enthusiasm. This created a ladder. Younger children had models close enough to understand. Older children got practice leading before adulthood. Knowledge moved downward naturally, not from one official teacher, but through the whole child society. Modern schooling often does the opposite. It puts children with the same unfinished brain in one room and then acts surprised when the culture gets weird. Responsibility came early too. Not full adult responsibility. Nobody handed a 6-year-old a spear and said, "The protein supply is your problem now." But small, real tasks appeared as soon as a child could handle them. Carry this, fetch water, gather sticks, watch your little brother, sort these roots, hold the baby, stay near the group, do not touch the thing that killed your uncle. Ancient childhood was not years of doing nothing, followed by, "Suddenly you are grown, good luck." It was a ramp. Small tasks became bigger tasks. Play became practice. Practice became contribution. Contribution became identity. And that identity mattered. A child who helps learns something deeper than the task. They learn, "I am needed here. Not later. Now." Many modern children are protected from responsibility for years, then expected to become capable almost overnight. Ancient children were given capability in pieces. And when they messed up, the response was not always what people assume. The stereotype says ancient life was brutal, so ancient discipline must have been brutal too. But many hunter-gatherer societies studied across Africa, the Americas, and Australia show something more surprising. With young children, discipline was often gentle, patient, and non-punitive. Children had freedom to explore, test, and make mistakes. Adults stepped in when danger became serious, but they did not necessarily control every movement. Physical punishment was often rare or discouraged. But in a small community, obedience was not enough. You needed capable adults, people who could judge danger, cooperate, improvise, stay calm, and act without waiting to be ordered. A child raised only through fear might become compliant, but compliant is not the same as competent. So many communities leaned on teasing, stories, example, natural consequences, and the pressure of belonging to a group where everyone saw what you did, which might be worse. In a small band, your mistake did not disappear. It became community content. You do something foolish at 7, and by sunset, 3 cousins know, 2 elders are laughing, and your grandmother has quietly turned it into a moral lesson with your name technically removed, but not enough removed. That is not permissive parenting. That is social discipline with excellent distribution. But if the mother was not alone, who else held the system together? Start with fathers. The lazy image is simple. Ancient father hunts, provides, returns, and stands near the fire looking serious and emotionally unavailable. Sometimes fathers focused more on provision or later teaching, but that was not the whole picture. Among the Aka of Central Africa, fathers are famously close to infants. Anthropologist Barry Hewlett found that Aka fathers stayed within arm's reach of their babies for nearly half the day and held them for about a fifth of it. That is not a distant background character. That is a father with the baby physically on him, holding, soothing, staying near. In other cultures, fathers taught hunting, tracking, tool-making, navigation, and adult skills when children were older. The point is not that ancient fathers were always one thing. It is that they were not naturally nothing. And then there was someone even more important than people usually admit, the grandmother. At first glance, grandmothers are an evolutionary puzzle. Humans are one of the few species where females often live for decades after they stop having children. If evolution only cared about direct reproduction, why keep someone alive, experienced, and healthy long after she will have no more babies of her own? One powerful answer is that she helped the babies already born survive. This is the grandmother hypothesis. Kristen Hawkes helped develop it after studying Hadza grandmothers in Tanzania, especially older women gathering tubers and other foods that supported grandchildren. A grandmother could feed, carry, watch, teach, help a daughter, remember a drought, identify a plant, warn about a place, and keep knowledge alive. She increased survival without giving birth again. That is not retirement. That is strategy. Studies from places like rural Gambia, pre-industrial Finland, and Canada have found that involved grandmothers, especially maternal grandmothers, can improve child survival and nutrition. So the grandmother was not a sentimental extra sitting near the fire for atmosphere. She was a load-bearing wall. Take her out, and part of the human roof starts making concerning noises. And her value was not only in labor, it was in memory. Before writing, memory was one of the most important technologies humans had. No books, no files, no search bar. So how did children inherit what the group knew? Stories, songs, myths, warnings, jokes, proverbs, rituals, scary stories. Stories about foolish people who made mistakes so memorable they became educational material for generations. Oral tradition was not just entertainment, it was data storage with rhythm. A story about a child who wanders too far is not only a bedtime scare, it is a safety briefing wearing a monster mask. Elders were living archives. They remembered food sources, conflicts, bad seasons, healing plants, dangerous places, and the exact kind of mistake that sounds stupid until somebody dies from it. Children absorbed culture not as a lesson, but as a world. And eventually that world demanded a crossing. Childhood could not last forever. At some point, the group needed to recognize that a person had changed. So many cultures created rites of passage. Not a quiet birthday where someone says, "You are technically older now." A public transformation. There might be isolation, instruction, tests, fasting, a demonstration of skill, sacred knowledge, a new name, a new status. The forms differed, but the problem was universal. The group had to know when a child could carry adult duties, and the child had to know it too. Adulthood was not only biological, it was social, it was witnessed. The community said, "We see you differently now." And because they all saw it, the change became real. Identity started even earlier. In many societies, a name could connect the child to an ancestor, an event, a hope, or the circumstances of birth. Sometimes a name stayed temporary during the most dangerous part of early childhood and became permanent only after the child survived it. That sounds cold until you hear the grief inside it. A permanent name could mark not just identity, but arrival. And once inside, identity was built through relationship. You were someone's child, grandchild, sibling, helper, student, troublemaker, responsibility. Ancient children were not raised in a separate child universe and then released into real life as confused young adults. They were woven into real life from the beginning. Put all of this together, and ancient childcare starts to look very different from the stereotype. It was not primitive people improvising around a fire. It was a sophisticated social machine. A baby was carried on bodies, slept near warmth, nursed for years, and soothed quickly by more than one adult. A child learned through watching, copying, play, mixed age groups, small responsibilities, stories, teasing, and gradual trust. Fathers could be caregivers, teachers, hunters, or mentors. Grandmothers fed children, protected them, stabilized families, and carried memory. Elders turned survival knowledge into stories. Rites of passage made adulthood visible. Names and duties pulled children into identity. None of this required school buildings, printed books, parenting experts, or formal institutions. The institution was the group. And no, ancient childhood was not paradise. Children died, parents grieved, food failed, adults made mistakes. Communities could be violent, unfair, frightened, or cruel. The past was not a warm documentary filter with nice music. But the basic design understood something modern life often denies. A child is too much for one or two people alone. Not because parents are weak, because children are human. Human children evolved inside a web of people. Many arms, many voices, many older children, many watchful adults, many stories, many chances to try, many chances to be caught. Not perfect parents, enough people. And then, very recently, we changed the system. We took the village and shrank it into the household, then into the nuclear family. Then, often, into one adult at home with a baby, a phone, a pile of laundry, and the quiet sense that everyone else has somehow figured this out. One adult is expected to be the mother, father, grandmother, elder, school, playgroup, emotional regulator, cook, cleaner, nurse, income source, night watch, memory keeper, and calm voice at 3 a.m. And when that adult feels crushed, the modern world often calls it a personal problem. Try a better routine. Try a better method. Try being more present. Try being softer. Try being firmer. Try doing everything correctly while sleeping in fragments and slowly forgetting your own personality. But maybe the problem is not that modern parents are failing. Maybe the problem is that we took a job built for a village and handed it to one or two people. Advice is not the same as help. A comment section is not a grandmother. A parenting app is not an aunt taking the baby so you can close your eyes. A book is not a neighbor noticing you are at the edge and quietly bringing food. This is the ancient story matters. Not because we can go back, we cannot. But we can stop pretending the modern setup is the natural one. It is not. The natural one was crowded, interdependent, noisy, annoying, warm, full of opinions, help, interference, stories, hands, and presence. And yes, every village has at least one person who thinks they know exactly how your baby should be raised and will tell you while holding soup. But the deeper truth remains. Human beings were not built to raise children in isolation. Children were not designed for perfect parents. They were designed for enough people. And parents were not designed to be the whole village. They were designed to live inside one. So if you have ever raised a child and felt like you could not keep up, maybe the problem was not you. Maybe something ancient was missing around you. The missing thing was not love. Modern parents love their children fiercely. The missing thing was structure, hands, witnesses, relief. The old human net. Go back to the newborn at the beginning. No hospital, no doctor, no crib, no app. Just a small body in a dangerous world. And then the hands arrive. Mother, father, grandmother, aunt, sibling, cousin, elder, friend, one after another, standing between the child and the dark. That is how we survived. Not because every parent was perfect, not because ancient life was gentle, but because the child was not alone, and neither was the parent. Maybe that is the piece worth carrying forward. A village does not have to be ancient. It can begin very small. One meal brought over, 1 hour holding the baby, one friend who listens, one neighbor who notices, one adult who becomes safe, one hand offered before someone has to ask. That is not nothing. That is the oldest human technology there is. So maybe the question is not only how ancient people raised children. Maybe the question is what they knew that we forgot. A child is not a solo project. A parent is not a whole civilization. And behind every surviving human being is a chain of hands, mostly unnamed, mostly gone, each one holding long enough for the next to take over. Who held you?